The most dangerous man in Chicago was taking his fiancée to dinner until he saw his ex crossing the crosswalk with twins. Vincent Moretti adjusted the cufflinks on his tailored Armani suit as his armored black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through the shadowed streets of downtown Chicago. 2 SUVs followed close behind his security detail, always watching, always ready. The evening lights of the city reflected off the tinted windows, illuminating the woman beside him. Natasha Sinclair, 29. Raven hair swept into an elegant updo, diamond earrings catching the light with every turn of her head. She was everything his world demanded: beautiful, connected, powerful. At 37, Vincent had learned that power could buy almost anything, including alliances sealed by marriage. His engagement to Natasha was 3 months old, long enough to satisfy the families, short enough to avoid pretending he felt anything beyond obligation. No love, no passion, no complications, just business dressed as a wedding. "Father says the merger will triple our territory," Natasha said, checking her reflection in a compact mirror. "Our wedding will be the most talked about event of the year." Vincent said nothing. His steel-gray eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. The traffic light turned red. The crosswalk filled with evening pedestrians, ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware that the man watching them from behind bulletproof glass had ended lives with a single word. Vincent watched them absently, his mind already calculating tomorrow's negotiations when something made him freeze. A woman was crossing the street. She moved slowly, carefully, carrying 2 babies against her chest. Twins, bundled in soft blue and pink blankets. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked exhausted. She looked like she hadn't slept in months, even from a distance. Even with her head down, even after 14 months of forcing himself to forget. Vincent knew that profile. The gentle curve of her neck, the way she held her shoulders, the quiet strength in every step. Scarlett Morgan, his former lover, the woman he had abandoned exactly 1 year and 2 months ago. The babies looked about 4 months old. The timing would be exactly right. Vincent's hands that had never trembled, holding a gun now, shook against the leather armrest. The world outside seemed to slow as Scarlett paused in the middle of the crosswalk. One of the babies began to fuss. She shifted them both, pressing a gentle kiss to the crying infant's forehead, humming something soft. The baby quieted. She continued walking, disappearing into the crowd on the other side. "Vincent?" Natasha's voice cut through the fog. "The light's green. Your driver is waiting for your signal." He blinked. Cars behind them were waiting. His men were glancing back through the rearview mirror, confused by his hesitation. "Vincent, you look like you've seen a ghost," Natasha said, studying his face with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. "Do you know that woman?" Vincent forced his expression back to stone. No one important, but his mind was racing. Had Scarlett been pregnant when he left her? That night, the night he had told her they were finished, that she didn't belong in his world, that loving him would only get her killed had she been carrying his children. Had she known and chosen not to tell him? Or had she discovered it afterward, alone and abandoned, and made the decision to raise them without him? The questions multiplied, each one more devastating than the last. He had left her to protect her. He had convinced himself that walking away was the noble choice, that a woman like Scarlett deserved sunlight, not shadows. That she deserved a normal life, not a life spent looking over her shoulder. But now, seeing her with those babies exhausted, struggling, but still standing, Vincent realized something that made his carefully constructed world crack down the middle. She had given him children. She had given him a son and a daughter, and she had done it completely, utterly alone. While he sat in a bulletproof car beside a woman he didn't love, planning a wedding that meant nothing, Scarlett had been fighting to survive, fighting to keep their children alive, fighting a battle he should have been there to fight beside her. One question echoed in his mind, louder than the blood pounding in his ears. What if the life he had been so determined to protect her from was the only life worth living? If you felt something watching this, hit that like button and share this story with someone who believes in second chances. Subscribe to our channel because Vincent's journey to redemption is just beginning. The most luxurious restaurant in Chicago that night seemed to fade to a blur in Vincent's eyes. Candlelight trembled on the table. Soft jazz drifted from the corner of the room, and Natasha was saying something about wedding invitations. Vincent heard her voice, but he couldn't focus on each word. His gaze kept sliding back to the tall glass windows facing the street, where pedestrians moved through the cold night. He wondered where Scarlett was right now. Was she warm enough? Were the children sleeping well? "Vincent, are you listening to me?" Natasha set her wine glass down, her tone slightly irritated. "I'm asking about the guest list. My father wants to invite at least 500 people. Vincent turned back to her and nodded mechanically. Fine. You decide. Natasha frowned. Are you okay? You've been strange since we were in the car. I'm just thinking about work, Vincent said, his voice flat. It was a lie. He wasn't thinking about work. He was thinking about Scarlett's tired eyes, about the way she kissed the forehead of a crying baby with a tenderness he'd never seen in anyone else. He was thinking about how she had lived for 14 months, alone, with 2 newborn babies, while he sat here drinking expensive wine beside a woman he didn't love. The dinner dragged on like it would never end. Vincent answered Natasha with short sentences, agreed with everything she suggested, without truly listening. When they finally left the restaurant, he let out a quiet breath of relief. The motorcade took Natasha home first, then Vincent ordered the driver to return to his own estate. The Moretti estate sat on the top of a hill, looking down over all of Chicago. The floor-to-ceiling glass reflected the glittering lights below like a carpet of stars. Vincent stood at the window of his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand, but he didn't drink. He only stood there, staring down at the city, wondering where in that sea of light Scarlett might be. The clock struck 2 in the morning. Vincent picked up his phone and called Marco. Marco sounded half asleep at first, but he snapped awake the instant he heard his boss's voice. Boss, what is it? Find everything about Scarlett Morgan, Vincent said, his voice cold and final. Her current address, her job, her financial situation, and those children. I want to know everything. Silence stretched on the other end of the line. Too long. Vincent's brow tightened. Marco? Boss. Marco hesitated. A rare thing for a 45-year-old man who had followed Vincent for 20 years. There's something I should have told you a long time ago. Vincent's heart clenched. Say it. Not over the phone. Marco exhaled. Tomorrow morning, when you read the file, you'll understand. What file? What do you know about her? Vincent's voice sharpened. Marco went quiet for a moment, then said, I'll bring it in the morning, 6 o'clock. And boss, you should prepare yourself. The call ended. Vincent hurled the phone onto the desk, braced both hands on the wood, and bowed his head. Marco knew something Vincent didn't, something that had happened during the 14 months he'd tried to forget Scarlett. He went into the bedroom, but he couldn't close his eyes. Every time he tried to sleep, the image of Scarlett at the crosswalk rose up again. The way she stopped in the middle of the road when the baby cried. The way she hummed a lullaby, her voice as light as breath. The way the baby fell silent the moment Scarlett held them. Scarlett had always carried that kind of quiet miracle, the kind that made everything around her soften into peace. Even him, a man with blood and darkness on his hands, had once felt peace when he was beside her, and he had thrown it away. He had walked off without looking back. Vincent stared up at the ceiling in the dark, one single question drilling deeper and deeper into his mind. What had she been through when he wasn't there? At the same time, on the other side of the city, Scarlett Morgan was climbing the stairs to the 5th floor of an aging apartment building, one step at a time. There was no elevator. There never was an elevator in the places she could afford to rent. In her arms, Leo and Luna slept deeply, their soft breaths warming the skin at her neck. Each step felt weighted with lead, her legs trembling with exhaustion. But she didn't stop. She never stopped. Stopping wasn't an option when 2 tiny lives depended entirely on her. The studio was small, almost impossibly so, but clean, and it welcomed her with the scent of fabric softener and the warm yellow glow of the table lamp she'd bought at a garage sale for $5. Everything in this room had come from a garage sale or a secondhand store. The faded sofa, the scratched wooden table, the old crib she'd repainted white. But to Scarlett, this was home. This was the only safe place she could give her children. She gently laid Leo and Luna into the crib, and the 2 babies immediately found each other's hands in their sleep, tiny fingers weaving together as if they understood that all they truly had was each other. Scarlett stood there looking at them, her chest tightening with love and with a pain she never allowed herself to show. She glanced at the wall clock. 3 more hours before she had to leave for the night shift. 3 hours to sleep, to eat, to get ready. But first, she needed to shower, needed to wash clothes for tomorrow, needed to prepare milk for the babies. Scarlett's life was an endless chain of things that had to be done, and she'd been used to that for a long time. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring into nothingness, and memories rushed in like a flood. When she was 3, her parents died in a car accident, leaving her alone in this world. She grew up in an orphanage, where love was a luxury and survival was the first lesson. When she was 14, a family adopted her, and she thought she finally had a roof over her head. But her adoptive father taught her that there were things worse than loneliness. She ran away on a rainy night, lived on the streets of Chicago, did whatever she had to do to survive. Then, when she was 25, she got a job as a bartender at an upscale nightclub. That was where she met Vincent Moretti. He walked in like a king entering his own kingdom, and everyone lowered their heads. But when his eyes met hers, Scarlett didn't lower hers. Maybe that was why he noticed her. 8 months of loving each other in secret were the happiest 8 months of her life. For the first time in 25 years, Scarlett felt truly loved. Vincent looked at her as if she were his entire world. He told her he'd protect her, that no one would ever hurt her again. And she believed him. She believed every word. Then one night, Vincent came to her apartment with eyes as cold as ice. He said they were done, that she didn't belong in his world, that loving him would only lead her to death. He didn't explain. He didn't give her a chance to speak. He only turned his back and walked away, and Scarlett stood there, watching the door close, feeling as if someone had just torn her heart out of her chest. 2 weeks later, she found out she was pregnant. She tried to find Vincent, but every door closed in her face. She went to the club, and they told her she was banned. She called. The number was blocked. She wrote letters. No one replied, as if she'd never existed in his life at all. 9 months of pregnancy alone. Scarlett cried herself dry, and then learned how not to cry anymore. She went into premature labor at 34 weeks, alone in the emergency room, with no one to hold her hand. Leo was born with fragile lungs and stayed in an incubator for 3 weeks, and Scarlett sat beside him for 18 hours a day, praying to a God she wasn't even sure existed. Now, looking at her 2 children sleeping so peacefully, Scarlett knew that all the suffering had been worth it. She stood, eyes drifting to the yellowed ultrasound photo taped to the wall, where 2 tiny shapes lay side by side. "I'll give you everything I never had," she whispered, like a vow. An hour later, Scarlett left the babies with Mrs. Chen, the 70-year-old neighbor who lived at the end of the hallway, the only kind woman she'd ever had in her life. She kissed each child on the forehead, pulled on her thin coat, and stepped out into the darkness to go to Cook County Hospital and begin her 12-hour shift. She didn't see the black SUV parked across the street. She didn't know someone was watching her every step. She only knew that tonight, she needed to earn enough money to pay for next week's milk. At exactly 6 in the morning, Marco walked into Vincent's study with a thick file in his hands. Vincent had been awake all night, still sitting in the armchair by the window, the whiskey from last night untouched on the table. He didn't bother looking at Marco, only held out his hand. "Give it to me." Marco set the file on the desk, then took a step back, standing still like a statue. Vincent opened the first page, and every line he read felt like a knife driving into his chest. Scarlett's current address was a studio apartment on the South Side, one of the most dangerous areas in Chicago, a place even his own men didn't want to set foot in after dark. The building had no elevator, no security, and the front door didn't even have an electronic lock. Vincent clenched his jaw and flipped to the next page. Her current job was night shift nurse at Cook County Hospital, with a salary of $45,000 a year, a number that wasn't even enough to rent a decent apartment in a safer suburb. She worked 12 hours every night, 6 days a week. Vincent felt his throat tighten. While he lived in a mansion on a hill, she was working herself to the bone to earn every dollar to raise their children. The next page made Vincent stop. Hospital debt. $87,000 from the delivery. He read the amount again, unable to believe his eyes. $87,000. A sum that, to him, was nothing more than dinner at a luxury restaurant, but to Scarlett it could be a lifetime she'd never pay off. And then he turned to the next page, where the information about the 2 children was listed. He read each word one by one, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. The boy was named Leo Vincent Morgan. The girl was named Luna Rose Morgan. Vincent went still. He read it again. Leo Vincent Morgan. She had given his name to their son. After everything he'd done to her, after he'd abandoned her without a single explanation, Scarlett had still given his name to their son. Vincent didn't know what he was supposed to feel. Moved, guilty, in pain. Maybe all of it, tangled together into a chaos he couldn't unravel. "Boss," Marco spoke, his voice lower than usual. "There's more." Vincent lifted his eyes to him, signaling for Marco to continue. Marco drew a deep breath, then said, "She delivered early at 34 weeks. Alone in the emergency room, no one beside her, no family, no friends, no one at all." Vincent clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. Marco went on, his tone heavy. "The medical records show the boy, Leo, struggled from the moment he was born. He spent his first 3 weeks in intensive care, and the nurses remembered Scarlett as a woman who refused to leave her son's side even to eat or sleep. Vincent shot to his feet, the chair tipping backward with a loud crash. He turned his back to Marco, braced both hands on the window frame, and bowed his head. His body shook as he tried to hold his emotions inside. "She had no one with her?" he asked, his voice rough. "No one. She handled everything herself," Marco answered. "From pregnancy to delivery, from raising the babies to going to work. Alone." The room sank into silence. Vincent didn't speak for a long time, only stood there, staring out at the city, waking up below. Finally, he turned back, his eyes cold as ice but his voice trembling. "Protect her. 24/7. Watch every movement. Don't let her know." Marco nodded. "Someone's been on her since last night already, boss." Vincent sat down, picked up the file again. He turned to the last page, where there was a photograph of Scarlett taken secretly from a distance. She was thinner than she'd been 14 months ago. Deep shadows beneath her eyes, but she was still beautiful. That strength was still there in her gaze, that resilience he'd once loved with a kind of obsession. Vincent reached out and touched the photograph, his finger gliding lightly over her face. "Why didn't you come to me?" he whispered to himself. It was the question he didn't yet have an answer to. She knew who he was, knew what kind of power he had. Why didn't she come to him when she found out she was pregnant? Why did she choose to endure it alone? Vincent didn't know that the answer to those questions would hurt him 1,000 times more than what he was feeling right now. 3 days after Vincent ordered Scarlett protected, his phone rang at midnight. An unknown number. Vincent stared at the screen, the instincts of a Mafia boss putting him on alert at once. He answered without a word, saying nothing, only waiting. The voice on the other end made the blood in his body turn to ice. "Moretti, it's been a long time. I know your secret now. Richard Blackwood." The name slid into Vincent's throat like a cold blade. Blackwood was the Mafia boss who ruled the north side of Chicago, the sworn enemy of the Moretti family for 2 decades. And the very man who had threatened Vincent 14 months ago, swearing he'd kill any woman who dared to love him. That was why Vincent left Scarlett. That was why he shoved her out of his life without a single explanation. And now Blackwood was calling him with a triumphant laugh in his voice. "Why are you so quiet, Moretti? Not happy to hear my voice?" Blackwood sneered. "I'll admit it, you hit it well. A woman and 2 children. How long have you kept that buried, huh?" Vincent tightened his grip on the phone, his jaw locking. He didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. Blackwood went on, his voice like snake venom. "My men tailed your security detail. Those idiots don't know how to stay invisible. They're swarming around a miserable apartment building on the south side, and I wondered what could possibly matter that much. Turns out it's a tiny nurse with 2 newborn babies. Twins who look a lot like you, Moretti, especially the boy." Vincent felt rage flare in his chest like fire. He wanted to tear Blackwood apart on the spot, wanted to press a gun barrel to his head and pull the trigger. But he didn't let emotion take the wheel. He was Vincent Moretti. He never let an enemy see his weakness. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice cold as ice. "Hand her over to me," Blackwood replied, his tone turning more serious. "That woman and the 2 children. If you don't hand them over, I'll take them myself. And I guarantee you, the way I take them won't be pleasant." Vincent laughed, a hard, empty laugh with no humor in it. "Blackwood, listen to me. If you, or anyone in your crew, dares to touch even a single hair on their heads, I'll burn down everything you've built. I'll kill your family one by one, starting with the ones you love most. And when I get to you, I'll make sure you beg to die." Silence held for a few seconds. Then Blackwood laughed loudly. "So Vincent Moretti finally has a weakness. I've been waiting for this for 20 years. He paused, his voice turning even more vicious. "I won't rush. I'll wait for the right moment. And when you least expect it, I'll take the most important thing you have, just like your father took from me back then." The call ended. Vincent slammed the phone onto the desk, sprang to his feet, and let out a roar of fury. He swept his arm across the desktop, hurling everything to the floor in a crash of glass and noise. Then he stopped, drew in a deep breath, and forced himself to calm down. He grabbed the phone and called Marco. Double the number of men protecting Scarlett, 24/7. There can't be a single gap, and prepare for every scenario, including all-out war. Marco took the order, but after the call ended, Vincent knew it still wasn't enough. Protection from a distance couldn't guarantee safety for Scarlett and the children. Blackwood was a poisonous snake. He'd find the smallest opening, and when he struck, it might already be too late. Vincent needed to get close to Scarlett. He needed to move her and the children somewhere safer, somewhere he could control. But first, he needed to speak with her. That night, Vincent drove his own car to Cook County Hospital, where Scarlett was working the night shift. He parked in the darkness of the lot, staring through the windshield toward the brightly lit building. She was in there, working, trying to survive, not knowing danger was circling closer. And he sat here, waiting, bracing himself for the meeting he'd been running from for 14 months. Tonight, he'd see her again. Even if she screamed in his face, threw him out, or even slapped him, he still had to see her. Because this wasn't about him, or about what he felt anymore. This was about the survival of the children he'd never once held in his arms. At 2 a.m, the doors of Cook County Hospital opened and Scarlett stepped outside. The 12-hour shift had drained her down to the bone, but she still walked quickly toward the parking lot, wanting to get home as fast as possible so she could sleep a few hours before the babies woke up. The lot was empty at this hour. Only a handful of night shift employees' cars scattered beneath the weak yellow streetlights. Scarlett pulled her car keys from her pocket and hurried toward her beat-up Honda Civic. Then she stopped. Someone was standing beside her car, a tall figure in a black suit, motionless as a statue in the shadows. The survival instinct forged through years of living on the streets made Scarlett react instantly. She yanked a can of pepper spray from her coat pocket, raised it, ready to strike. "Don't move. I'll spray if you take one more step." The man stepped out of the darkness, letting the streetlight fall across his face. And Scarlett felt her heart miss a beat. That face, those steel-gray eyes, those sharp, hard angles. She would never forget them, no matter how hard she tried. Vincent. The name left her mouth, her voice cold as ice. The pepper spray was still raised, but her hand began to shake. Not from fear, from anger, from pain, from 14 months spent trying to erase this man. And now he was standing here, in front of her, as if he had the right. "Scarlett," Vincent said, his voice lower and rougher than she remembered. "I need to talk to you." Scarlett lowered the pepper spray, not because she trusted him, but because she knew that if Vincent Moretti wanted to hurt her, he would have done it long ago. She laughed, a bitter laugh with no humor in it. 14 months. 14 months without a word, without a message, without a single sign that you were alive or dead. And now you want to talk? Vincent didn't answer right away. He just stood there, looking at her, his eyes holding something Scarlett didn't want to untangle. Then he spoke, his voice sounding strangled. "I know about the children. I know they're mine." Scarlett felt as if someone had punched her in the stomach. She'd known this day would come. She'd prepared herself for it. But when it truly arrived, she still wasn't ready. She was silent for a moment, swallowing the pain rising in her chest. Then she looked straight into his eyes. "They're my children. You lost the right to call them yours the night you walked away without even looking back." Each word she spoke was like a bullet fired straight into Vincent. He didn't flinch. He stood there and took it, because he knew he deserved it. "Scarlett, you're in danger," he said, urgency sharpening his tone. "Someone knows about you and the children. Someone very dangerous. I need to protect." Scarlett cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. "I don't need you to protect me. I survived 14 months without you. I was pregnant alone, gave birth alone, raised them alone. I didn't need you then, and I sure as hell don't need you now." She turned her back, reaching for the car door, ready to drive away from this conversation, away from the man who had shattered her heart. But Vincent stepped forward and put his hand on the door, stopping her from opening it. "Scarlett, please." His voice sounded like a plea, a sound Scarlett had never heard from Vincent Moretti, the most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago. "Let me explain. Give me one chance." Scarlett turned back to face him, her eyes burning with anger and hurt. "Explain? What do you want to explain? That you threw me away like an old thing? That you vanished from my life without telling me why? That you left me to face everything alone while you lived your luxury life?" She stopped, drew a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in her voice. "You have 5 minutes. Here, right now. Talk." Vincent looked at her, and for the first time in 14 months, he felt a small, fragile thread of hope. She was giving him 5 minutes, more than he deserved. He took a deep breath, then began. 14 months ago, Richard Blackwood gave me a choice. I saw what he did to my brother's fiancée. He executed her in her wedding dress without blinking. When he swore you were his next target, I panicked. I believed that by erasing myself from your life, I was erasing the target on your back. I thought walking away was the only way to keep you breathing. I thought the only way to protect you was to stay away from you. I thought if I wasn't connected to you anymore, he wouldn't have a reason to touch you." Scarlett stood there listening, but her silence wasn't cold anymore. It was boiling. And when Vincent finished, she exploded. You thought? You thought? Why? Her voice rang out across the empty parking lot, full of fury and pain. You didn't give me the right to choose. You decided for me that I couldn't face danger. You decided for me how I should live my life. Do you have any idea how selfish that is? Vincent tried to say something, but Scarlett didn't give him the chance. She stepped forward, her finger stabbing the center of his chest. I could have died alone giving birth. Did you know that? I delivered early at 34 weeks. Alone in the emergency room. No one held my hand. No one told me it was going to be okay. Her voice started to shake, but she didn't stop. Leo almost didn't make it, Vincent. Your son had to fight for every single breath while I watched him through a glass box, terrified and alone, praying that his tiny heart wouldn't stop beating. Vincent felt as if someone were crushing his heart in their fist. Every word Scarlett spoke was true, and every truth was a sentence passed on him. I didn't know you were pregnant, he said, his voice rough. If I'd known... Scarlett cut him off with a bitter laugh. If you'd known, then what? You would have stayed? You wouldn't have left? She shook her head. I did look for you, Vincent. I looked for you. She put weight on every word. When I found out I was pregnant, I went to your club. They said you'd ordered them not to let me in. I called you. The number was blocked. I wrote letters, sent them to every address I knew, and no one answered. I even went to your office, and the guards dragged me out like a dog. She stopped, her voice catching. I begged, Vincent. I begged to see you, and I was thrown out as if I'd never existed in your life. Vincent went numb. He hadn't ordered that. He'd tried to forget her, yes, but he'd never ordered Scarlett to be blocked. He'd never wanted her treated that way. I didn't order it, he said, his voice strangled. I swear to you, I didn't order anyone to block you. Scarlett stared at him, her eyes red, but no tears fell. She'd cried herself empty a long time ago. Then who? Who decided I didn't deserve to meet the father of my children? Vincent had no answer, but inside his mind, a name was rising. Marco. Scarlett continued, her voice more tired now. I'm drowning in hospital bills that I'll be paying off for the rest of my life just because I had to save our son. I work nights because during the day I have to care for the babies. I don't have family. I don't have friends. I don't have anyone except 2 children who depend completely on me. She looked down at her hands roughened by work and by too little sleep. There are nights I don't know if I'll have enough money to buy milk for next week. There are nights I cry in the bathroom so the babies won't hear me. There are nights I want to give up. She lifted her head and looked straight into Vincent's eyes. But I don't give up, because Leo and Luna need me, because I'm everything they have. Vincent couldn't take it anymore. He dropped to his knees right in front of Scarlett, head bowed low, shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I know these words aren't enough. I know nothing can make up for what you went through. But I'm sorry. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry for everything. Scarlett looked down at the man kneeling at her feet. Vincent Moretti, the most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago, was on his knees before her in the parking lot of a public hospital, begging for forgiveness. Part of her wanted to forgive him. That part still loved him, still remembered the nights he held her, and promised he'd protect her forever. But the rest of her, the part that had been cut too deep, couldn't forgive that easily. No, she said, her voice cold. Not enough. Right then, Vincent's phone vibrated. He stood, glanced at the screen. Marco, he answered, and what he heard made his face drain of color. Boss, Blackwood is moving. His men are gathering on the south side of the city. Looks like he's planning something. Tonight. Vincent hung up and looked at Scarlett, urgency blazing in his eyes. You're in real danger. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Tonight. He took her hand, and Scarlett didn't pull away. Let me get you and the children somewhere safe. Just tonight. After that, if you want to throw me out, I'll go. I promise. Quite. The Moretti estate sat on top of the hill, imposing and radiant in the night. But to Scarlett, it was nothing more than a luxurious prison. She agreed to come here reluctantly, not because of Vincent, but because of Leo and Luna. If what he'd said was true, if there really was someone dangerous targeting her and the children, she couldn't gamble her babies' lives just to protect her pride. Leo and Luna were settled in a private room on the 2nd floor, where there was a brand new ivory-white crib, soft toys with their tags still on, and wallpaper patterned with tiny stars. Scarlett stood there watching her children sleep, her chest tightening as she realized this was the first time in 4 months the babies had slept in a crib that wasn't secondhand. She didn't sleep. She pulled a chair up beside the crib and sat there, keeping watch over them the way she had for 14 months. In the darkness, she heard footsteps in the hallway, doors closing, low voices drifting up from downstairs. She knew Vincent was somewhere in this house, and she also knew he wasn't sleeping. Downstairs, in the study, Vincent was facing Marco. The 45-year-old man stood in front of his boss with his head lowered, not daring to look up. Vincent sat behind the desk, his eyes cold as ice. His jaw clenched so hard she could almost hear teeth grinding. "Talk," Vincent ordered, his voice low and dangerous. "Who gave the order to block Scarlett?" Marco was silent for a moment, then exhaled, his head dropping even lower. "I gave that order, boss. Not you." The room fell into a terrifying silence. Vincent said nothing, only stared at Marco with the look that everyone in the organization knew meant rage was about to break loose. Marco swallowed, then continued to explain. "After you left her, Blackwood kept men on her. He knew she'd been important to you. I was afraid if she kept trying to contact you, kept showing up in places connected to you, Blackwood would see her as a target." He paused, his voice heavier. "I thought if she couldn't reach you, she'd give up. She'd forget you and go on with her life. She'd be safe." Vincent stood, slowly coming around the desk. Each step sounded like a drumbeat of fate in the silent room. "And what about her being pregnant?" he asked, his voice so cold it raised gooseflesh. "Did you know that?" Marco lowered his head even further. "I didn't know she was pregnant when I gave the order. When I found out, it was 4 months later. By then..." He stopped, his voice thick. "By then it was too late. She'd stopped trying to reach you. She'd accepted that you didn't want to see her. I thought saying it then would only make everything worse. That was the last drop." Vincent lunged forward, grabbed Marco by the collar with both hands, and slammed him into the wall with terrifying force. His face was inches from Marco's, his eyes blazing with fury. "You stole the first 14 months of my children's lives," Vincent roared, his voice like a wounded animal. "You stole my chance to see my children be born, to hear their first cries, to be there while they fought to survive. Do you know Leo almost died? Do you know Scarlett faced all of that alone?" Marco didn't fight back. He let Vincent pin him to the wall, let the accusations crash down on him. "I know, boss. I know I was wrong." Vincent ground his teeth, his grip tightening. He wanted to kill Marco right then. He wanted to crush the throat of the man who had wrecked Scarlett's life, the man who had stolen precious moments Vincent could never get back. But then he heard a sharp inhale behind him. He turned and saw Scarlett standing in the doorway. She'd heard everything. Her eyes held disgust as she looked at Marco, but when she looked at Vincent, there was something else in her gaze. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe understanding. She realized Vincent hadn't known everything. Someone had cut them off, had kept her from reaching the father of her children, and that person wasn't Vincent. Vincent released Marco, shoving him aside. "Get out of my sight," he said, his voice cold as ice. "But you owe me. You'll pay that debt by protecting them with your life. If anything happens to Scarlett or the children, I'll kill you with my own hands." Marco nodded, said nothing, and quietly left the room. When the door closed, Vincent turned to Scarlett. He looked at her, his eyes full of pain and guilt. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I won't make excuses. Whatever Marco did, I'm still the one who left. I'm still the one who made the decision to stay away from you without giving you the right to choose. That's my fault, and I'll carry it for the rest of my life." The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of the Moretti estate, but the air inside the house was still heavy after what had happened last night. Scarlett sat in the living room, Luna sleeping soundly in her arms. Leo was still upstairs, watched by a maid. Scarlett hadn't slept at all last night, but at least the babies had gotten their first peaceful sleep in months. The sound of a car engine rose beyond the gate. Then the sharp click of high heels echoed across the marble floor. Scarlett lifted her head just as the living room doors flew open, and a woman stepped in. Natasha Sinclair, with sleek black hair and an expensive designer dress, froze when she saw Scarlett. Her eyes swept from Scarlett's exhausted face to the sleeping child in her arms, then turned cold as ice. "Who is she?" Natasha asked, her voice razor-sharp. "And why are there children in my husband's house?" Before Scarlett could react, Vincent appeared in the doorway. He'd heard Natasha's voice from the hall and knew this confrontation couldn't be avoided. He walked in and stood between Natasha and Scarlett, his face strangely calm. "Natasha," he said with a nod, "I didn't know you were coming." Natasha stepped closer, her eyes still locked on Scarlett and Luna. "You didn't answer your phone all night. I was worried." She stopped and pointed toward Scarlett. Now answer me. Who is she? Vincent didn't hesitate. My child, he said, clear and final. And their mother. The room fell into silence. Natasha stood there, her face going pale as if she'd been slapped. Then anger flared, burning through the aristocratic cool she always wore like armor. Your child? She shrieked, her voice high and sharp. You have a child with another woman and you didn't tell me? She turned to Scarlett with a look of contempt. Who is she? One of those cheap bar girls you used to play with before you met me? Vincent stepped forward, blocking Scarlett like a wall. Watch your mouth, Natasha, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You're talking about the mother of my children. Natasha laughed loudly, bitter and furious. Are you out of your mind? You're going to destroy the alliance between our two families for a bar girl and two children who came out of nowhere. Do you have any idea how much my father has invested in this relationship? Do you know what the consequences will be if you betray the Sinclair family? Vincent looked at her, and Natasha realized something had changed in his eyes. This wasn't the Vincent Moretti she knew, the cold, calculating man who always put power and alliances above everything else. This was someone else, someone she'd never met before. Alliances can be rebuilt, Vincent said, as calmly as if he were talking about the weather. Time with my children can't. Natasha went rigid. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're choosing them over me, over everything we've built. Vincent didn't answer. His silence was the answer. Natasha's face flushed red with rage. She stepped closer and jabbed a finger toward Vincent's face. You'll regret this decision. My father won't forgive you. You're choosing war with the Sinclair family, do you understand that? Vincent met her gaze, his eyes without a trace of fear. Then I choose war. Natasha stood there, trembling with fury. Then she yanked the glittering diamond engagement ring from her finger and threw it to the floor, the clatter ringing through the room. You'll pay for this, Vincent Moretti, she hissed through her teeth. I swear to you, you'll pay. Then she spun on her heel and stormed out, her heels cracking against the marble like gunshots. The door slammed, and the room sank into silence. Vincent stood there, staring at the ring on the floor, then turned to Scarlett. She was still seated, Luna in her arms, her eyes on him with a look she couldn't hide. You just gave up the most powerful alliance in the city, she whispered. Why? Vincent walked over, lowered himself to his knees in front of her, and looked at Luna sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. The baby girl's face was calm and innocent, her tiny fingers curled tight around the edge of Scarlett's shirt. Because they're not my children, he said, gentle but certain. And she isn't you. Scarlett didn't speak. She only looked at him, and for the first time since they'd found each other again, her eyes weren't completely cold anymore. The first week in the Moretti estate was a string of small disasters Vincent never imagined he'd have to face. On the first morning, he decided to mix formula himself so Scarlett could rest. He stood in the kitchen, staring at the can of formula and the baby bottle, as if they were alien objects. The first time, he poured in too much powder and the milk turned thick like paste. The second time, he forgot to check the water temperature, and the milk was so hot it couldn't be drunk. The third time, he shook the bottle too hard, and the milk splattered all over the kitchen floor. One of the estate's chefs started to step in to help, but Vincent raised a hand and stopped him. I'll do it myself, he said, his voice hard. And he did. The fourth time, the bottle was perfect. Diaper changes were worse. Vincent Moretti, the man who could stare into an enemy's eyes without blinking, the man who could order an execution without his hand trembling, now grimaced as if he were being tortured when he had to face his son's dirty diaper. Leo looked up at his father with wide eyes, as if judging the abilities of this strange man. Vincent fumbled with the diaper tabs, stuck them in the wrong place twice, had to peel them off and try again. But he didn't give up. He didn't call for a servant. He did it himself, even though it took 3 times as long as Scarlett needed. At night, when Leo or Luna cried, Vincent was always the first to wake. Scarlett told him he didn't have to, that she was used to being up at night, but he wouldn't listen. He picked up the crying baby, paced the room, clumsily soothing them until the cries faded. Scarlett watched it all from a distance. She didn't say anything, didn't praise him, didn't criticize him. She only watched, keeping space between them, as if she were waiting to see how long Vincent could hold on before he quit, the way he'd quit on her. In the second week, Scarlett called the hospital to ask about the repayment plan. She'd calculated that even with her night shifts, it would take a decade of breathing room she didn't have just to clear the mountain of debt from the delivery. But when she gave her name, the woman on the other end went quiet for a moment, then spoke in a startled tone. Miss Morgan, your balance was paid in full 3 days ago. Scarlett went still. Paid? By who? I'm not allowed to disclose that information, ma'am. But the record shows a law firm paid the full amount on behalf of an anonymous client. She didn't need to guess who that anonymous client was. She found Vincent in his study, reading some kind of report. She pushed the door open and walked in, her eyes burning with anger. You paid my hospital debt? Vincent looked up, his face calm. Yes. I don't need you to buy me off, Vincent, Scarlett said, her voice shaking with the effort of holding back. I'm not something that can be bought with money. Vincent set the papers down, stood, and met her eyes head on. This isn't buying you off, Scarlett. This is responsibility I should have taken from the start. You gave birth to my children, alone, and you carried that debt because I wasn't there. That money should have been mine to pay from the beginning. Scarlett wanted to argue. She wanted to scream in his face that she didn't need his help, that she'd handled everything on her own for 14 months. But she couldn't, because he was right. That debt shouldn't have been hers to carry alone. She stayed silent, turned her back, and walked out without another word. In the 3rd week, Scarlett began to realize something had changed. Vincent canceled every meeting, every business appointment. He stayed home all day, giving all his time to the babies. He read to Leo and Luna, even though they were only 4 months old and couldn't understand a thing. He read the same bright picture books over and over, his deep, warm voice filling the room, and the babies stared at him with curious eyes. One evening, Scarlett passed the nursery and heard Vincent singing. She stopped, her heart tightening. It was the lullaby she sang to the babies, the song her mother used to sing to her before she died. Scarlett didn't know how Vincent had learned it. Maybe he'd heard her sing and memorized it. His voice wasn't good, a little off-key in places, but he sang with a tenderness she'd never believed a mafia boss could have. That night, around 2 a.m, Scarlett woke with a strange feeling. She went to the nursery and found Vincent sitting in the armchair beside the crib, his head tilted to one side, asleep. One of his hands still rested on the crib rail, as if even in sleep he needed to stay close to his children. Scarlett stood there, looking at the man who had once shattered her heart. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, stubble rough across his jaw from not shaving. But he was here. Every night, he was here. She went and pulled a thin blanket from the closet, then gently draped it over him. Her hand brushed his shoulder for a brief moment. It was the first time she'd reached out to touch him since they'd found each other again. A month passed, and Leo and Luna turned 5 months old. They were growing fast, their eyes brighter, their laughter clearer, and they were starting to grow curious about the world around them. The pediatrician said this was the stage when babies learn to roll over, and Scarlett had spent a lot of time placing them on their stomachs on the soft rug to practice. That afternoon, Vincent was in his study, reviewing business documents Marco had sent over. He'd tried to cut back on work, but there were still things that needed the boss's attention. Suddenly, Scarlett's voice rang out from downstairs, urgent and sharp. "Vincent, hurry!" Vincent's heart seemed to miss a beat. He threw the papers onto the desk, bolted out of the room, and ran down the stairs faster than he ever had. 100 worst-case scenarios tore through his mind in those few seconds. Blackwood attacking, the babies hurt, Scarlett in danger. He burst into the living room, breath coming hard, eyes sweeping the space for a threat. But there was no threat. Instead, he saw Scarlett kneeling on the rug, phone in her hand, and Leo was on his stomach right in front of her, his tiny head lifted, his round eyes wide, and a grin stretched across his face. He rolled over, Scarlett said, her voice trembling with emotion. Leo just rolled over by himself. Vincent froze for a moment, his brain needing a few seconds to process. No danger, no attack. His son had just rolled over for the first time in his life. He walked forward slowly, dropped to his knees beside Scarlett, and looked at Leo lying on his belly with adorable pride. The baby looked up at his father and beamed, arms and legs flailing as if he were showing off his achievement. Vincent felt his eyes burn. He lifted a hand and gently rubbed his son's back, his voice thick. "You did it. Good job, my boy." Leo seemed to understand the praise, laughed even louder, and that sound was the most beautiful music Vincent had ever heard in his life. Luna lay beside them, watching her brother with eyes that refused to be outdone. She started to wiggle, trying to roll too, but her little body was too round, and she kept getting halfway before flopping back to where she started. She let out a frustrated little sound, her face scrunching with disappointment. Vincent turned to his daughter and encouraged her softly. "You can do it, Luna. Come on, Daddy's princess." He put his hand behind her back, giving gentle support without doing it for her. Luna tried again, fell. Again, fell. On the 4th try, with a small grunt, she finally rolled over and ended up on her belly right beside her brother, her eyes wide with shock as if she couldn't believe she'd actually done it. The whole room burst open. Vincent clapped. Scarlett cheered, and the babies looked at their parents with excited faces, even though they didn't understand what was happening. This was their first family moment, a moment Vincent never believed he'd get to have. Scarlett raised her phone and filmed every second. Through the screen, she saw Vincent down on the rug, face to face with the babies, talking to them in a warm voice she'd never heard from him before. And she also saw herself in the corner of the frame, smiling. She stopped, stunned. She was smiling. For the first time in a long time. Maybe for the first time since Vincent walked away 14 months ago. She was smiling a real smile. Not forced, not hidden. That night, after the babies were asleep, Vincent and Scarlett sat in the living room, soft yellow lamplight making the room feel warm. Vincent stared into the empty space ahead, his voice low and aching. How many moments like this did I miss, Scarlett? She was quiet for a moment, then answered honestly, a lot. Leo laughed for the first time when he was 2 months old. Luna got her first tooth at 3.5 months, the first time they recognized their mother's face, the first time they held hands in their sleep. She paused and looked at him. But you're here now. Vincent turned to her, his eyes full of resolve. I won't miss another moment, I swear. They sat in silence for a while. Then Scarlett did something she didn't think she would do. She took out her phone, opened her photo library, and handed it to Vincent. These are the videos you missed. Vincent took the phone and started watching. The first video was Leo's first laugh, a tiny laugh inside a miserable studio apartment. The next video was Luna's first tooth, her mouth slick with drool and her eyes crinkled with a bright grin. Then more videos, one small moment after another. Every piece of life Scarlett had recorded during the months she'd been alone. Vincent watched each one without speaking, but his tears kept falling, silent and unstoppable, until the last video ended and the screen went dark. That night, around 3 o'clock in the morning, screaming tore through the quiet of the Moretti estate from Scarlett's room. Vincent bolted upright instantly, the instincts of a man who'd lived his whole life in danger making him move before his mind could even catch up. He lunged out of his room, ran down the hallway, and shoved Scarlett's door wide open. She was on the bed, curled in on herself, both hands clamped over her head, screaming and crying in her sleep. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her face twisted with pain and terror. No, please don't. Please, she cried, her voice like the wail of a child left behind. Vincent didn't hesitate. He climbed onto the bed and pulled Scarlett into his arms, holding her tight as if she might vanish the moment he let go. Scarlett, baby, wake up. It's just a nightmare. I'm here. I'm here, he whispered into her ear, his hand smoothing the sweat-damp hair, trying to draw her out of the nightmare that had her trapped. It took a few minutes before Scarlett's screaming finally began to fade, and she slowly opened her eyes. Her gaze was wild, lost, as if she didn't know where she was. Then she saw Vincent, and she started to cry, not the silent tears she'd learned to hide for 14 months. These were broken, choking sobs, as if a dam had been smashed and every grief she'd held back for so long was pouring out at once. A nightmare about what, Scarlett? Vincent asked gently, still holding her close. Scarlett was shaking, her voice breaking between sobs. About my childhood, about my adoptive father, about what he did to me when I was 14. She stopped, swallowing hard, as if every word were a shard of glass cutting her throat. About the nights I was alone in the hospital, watching Leo in the incubator, not knowing if he'd live. About the times I thought I couldn't keep going. Vincent felt his heart splinter as he heard it. She'd carried these wounds for years, hiding them behind strength and grit, never letting anyone see. And now, for the first time, she was letting him see her completely helpless. You don't have to be strong alone anymore, Scarlett, he said, his voice low and steady. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Scarlett cried in his arms, cried as if she'd held her tears back for too long and now couldn't stop. She cried for the childhood that was stolen, for the years of wandering alone, for 14 months of raising babies in loneliness and exhaustion. She cried because for the first time in so long, someone was holding her and telling her she didn't have to be strong. Vincent didn't say anything, only held her tighter, letting her cry until there were no tears left to cry. When Scarlett's sobs finally began to quiet, she whispered against his chest, so softly he almost didn't hear. I'm scared, Vincent. I'm scared you'll leave again. The words hit Vincent like a knife to the heart. He gently lifted her chin, looked straight into her eyes swollen red from crying. I'll be here. For the children. For you. Whatever you choose, whether you forgive me or not, I'll never leave again. I swear. They sat in the darkness without saying anything more. From the next room, the steady breathing of Leo and Luna drifted through, soft and peaceful. That sound was a reminder that they weren't just two separate people anymore. They were the parents of two tiny lives that depended on them. Scarlett looked at Vincent, her eyes still red but calmer now. "I haven't forgiven you completely," she said. "Honest. It might take a long time. It might never be complete, but I'm trying." Vincent nodded, asking for nothing more. "I understand, and I'll wait. As long as it takes." They sat there in the dark of the room, and something shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not that far, but maybe acceptance. Maybe a willingness to allow a new chance. Scarlett reached out her hand, and Vincent took it. Not a kiss, not a promise. Just two hands laced together in the night, holding tight as if it was the only lifeline in a storm that had lasted far too long. At the same time, in a discreet restaurant in the suburbs of Chicago, a secret meeting was taking place. Natasha Sinclair sat across from Richard Blackwood, 2 glasses of red wine on the table, but neither of them touched a drop. This wasn't a social visit. This was a meeting of 2 snakes, looking for the right place to sink their teeth into the man who'd wounded them. Blackwood studied the woman in front of him with a measuring gaze. Natasha Sinclair, the daughter of one of the most powerful Mafia families in the Northeast, once the fiancée of Vincent Moretti. Now she sat here, inside the restaurant of Vincent's sworn enemy, her eyes burning with hatred. "What do you want?" Blackwood asked bluntly, without any detours. He didn't have time for political games. Natasha lifted her glass, turned it slowly, watching the light slide through the deep red of the wine. "I want Vincent to lose everything," she said, her voice cold as ice. "I want him to lose his empire, lose his power, lose everyone's respect. And her, that cheap bar girl, I want her gone. I want her to stop existing in Vincent's life." Blackwood let out a low, dangerous laugh. The hatred of a betrayed woman is terrifying. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "But why should I help you? What do you have to trade?" Natasha smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes. "My father controls the entire freight transport route in the Northeast. If he allies with you instead of with Vincent, you'll have control of almost all of Chicago and the surrounding areas." Blackwood fell silent, weighing it. It was an attractive offer, very attractive. A Sinclair alliance was something he'd wanted for years, and now it was being placed in his hands. "And you think your father will agree?" he asked. "My father hates Vincent even more than I do after he called off the engagement," Natasha replied. "He'll be happy to watch Vincent collapse." Blackwood nodded, his decision made. "Then we have a deal." He took out his phone and called someone. A few minutes later, the door to the private room opened, and a man stepped inside. Tony, one of Vincent's close bodyguards, a man Blackwood had bought 6 months ago. "Report," Blackwood ordered. Tony lowered his head, his voice small and quick. "This week Vincent has an important meeting with allies in New York. He'll leave on Friday, return on Sunday. During that time, the estate will only have the basic security detail, about 10 men. Miss Morgan and the children will be home." Blackwood smiled, his eyes glinting with satisfaction. "This weekend, when Moretti goes to the meeting in New York, that's when we act." Natasha set her glass down and leaned forward. "I have one request. When you take her, make sure she sees me. I want her to know who's behind all of this. I want her to know she stole the wrong man." Blackwood nodded. "As you wish. But after that, she and the children belong to me. I'll use them to force Vincent onto his knees." Natasha shrugged, indifferent. "Do whatever you want with them. I just want to see Vincent suffer." The meeting ended. 2 enemies of Vincent shook hands, and a deadly alliance was forged in the dark. At the same time, back at the Moretti estate, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Vincent was sitting on the soft rug in the living room, Leo on his left thigh, Luna on his right, a bright picture book open in front of them. And the little bear said, "Who sat on my chair?" Vincent read the story, his voice dipping into a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to mesmerize the children. Leo and Luna stared at the colorful images in the book, round eyes wide with curiosity. Scarlett sat on the nearby sofa, watching the 3 of them with a tenderness on her face she didn't even realize was there. This was a peaceful moment, a moment neither of them ever thought they'd be allowed to have. Vincent lifted his head, caught Scarlett's gaze, and smiled. Not a polite smile, not the hard smile of a mafia boss, but a real one. The smile of a man who was happy with his family. They didn't know the storm was coming. They didn't know this quiet moment would soon be torn apart. On Friday morning, Vincent stood at the front doors of the Moretti estate, a small suitcase set by his foot, watching Scarlett hold Leo and Luna in her arms. He didn't want to go. Every cell in his body wanted to stay, beside them, protecting them. But the meeting in New York couldn't be postponed. The most important allies of the Moretti family would be there, and his absence would be taken as a sign of weakness. Vincent stepped closer, kissed Leo's forehead, then Luna's, and finally Scarlett's. His lips brushed lightly against her forehead, a tender gesture he'd never done before. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said softly. Then he knelt, looking into the eyes of his two small children. "Daddy'll be back soon. Keep Mommy safe." Leo and Luna stared at their father with round eyes, as if they understood something important was happening. Vincent stood and looked at Scarlett one last time. "Mark'll be here. The security detail's been reinforced. If you need anything, call me." Scarlett nodded and gave a faint smile. "We'll be fine. Go. Don't worry." Vincent got into the car, and the motorcade began to move. In the rearview mirror, he watched Scarlett standing at the door with both babies in her arms until they grew smaller and disappeared. He didn't know it might be the last time he'd see them safe. That day passed normally at the Moretti estate. Scarlett played with the babies, fed them, read to them. The guards patrolled on schedule, and everything seemed steady. But when night fell, things began to shift. At 11 o'clock at night, Tony slipped into the security control room. The night guard had already been drugged, slumped over the desk. Tony quickly entered the code and shut down the entire security system, from the surveillance cameras to the intrusion alarms. Then he opened the side gate and let a line of black vehicles glide silently onto the estate grounds. The first gunshot rang out at 11:15. Scarlett was in the bedroom, having just put the babies into their cribs, when she heard the sharp blast from downstairs. She froze for a heartbeat, then her mother's instinct took over her whole body. She scooped Leo and Luna up, pressed them tight against her chest, and ran toward the panic room Vincent had shown her. Gunfire cracked everywhere. Screams, the shatter of glass. She heard Marco shouting orders to the security team, then the relentless staccato of shots. She ran down the hallway, her heart pounding as if it might split, her legs shaking but never stopping. The door to the panic room was right in front of her. Just a few more steps, but a figure stepped out from a shadowed corner and blocked her path. Tony, the guard she'd seen circling the estate for weeks, the man she'd believed was one of Vincent's most trusted. "I'm sorry, Miss Morgan," Tony said, his voice without emotion. "It's just business." Scarlett backed up, clutching the babies tighter. "Move," she snarled, her voice filled with the ferocity of a mother protecting her children. "I'll kill anyone who touches my babies." Tony advanced, and Scarlett attacked. She had no weapon, but she had the desperation of a mother. She bit his hand, clawed at his face, kicked and punched with everything she had, all while trying to keep hold of two babies who were screaming in terror. But Tony was stronger. One punch to her face sent Scarlett staggering, then a blow to the back of her neck dropped her to the floor. The last thing she heard before darkness swallowed her was Leo and Luna's crying, and the sound of footsteps moving away. In New York, Vincent was sitting in a sealed meeting room when his phone vibrated. An unknown number. He meant to ignore it, but a strange instinct made him answer. A video arrived. Vincent opened it, and the blood in his body turned to ice. Scarlett was tied to a chair, her face bruised, blood at the corner of her mouth, but her eyes still burned with defiance. Behind her, Leo and Luna were crying inside an iron cage, tiny fingers gripping the bars. Then a familiar face appeared in the frame. Natasha Sinclair, smiling with a sickening triumph. "Hello, Vincent. Surprised?" Richard Blackwood's voice came from off-camera. "Moretti, you've got 1 hour to get to dock warehouse number 7. Alone. If I see any of your men, they die. All 3 of them." Scarlett in the video jerked against the ropes, her eyes locking on the camera as if she knew Vincent was watching. "Vincent, don't come. It's a trap." Then a slap across her face cut her off, but her gaze still wouldn't bow. The video ended. Vincent sat there with the phone in his hand, his body shaking with a rage he'd never felt in his life. Then he stood and walked out of the meeting without a single explanation. He called Marco, who'd survived the attack by sheer luck. "Prepare everything. Gather all our men. Call the private jet. I'm coming back to Chicago right now." On the plane, Vincent sat as still as stone, eyes cold as ice, his hand locked around the gun he never let out of reach. In his mind, there was only one thought. Tonight, only one side survives. Dock warehouse number 7 sat at the edge of the city, a long, abandoned structure, the perfect place for shadow deals where no one wanted witnesses. Vincent walked in alone, exactly as ordered, both hands raised to prove he wasn't carrying a weapon. But that was only the surface. Inside the warehouse, Blackwood was waiting, surrounded by more than 20 gunmen. Scarlett was still tied to a chair, her face more bruised than it had been in the video. But her eyes still burned with fury when she saw Vincent step in. Leo and Luna were in the iron cage behind her, their crying echoing through the vast space. Blackwood laughed when he saw Vincent, the sound bouncing off the walls like a crow's call. "So Vincent Moretti finally kneels for love," he said, voice thick with satisfaction. "I've waited for this day for 20 years. The day you walk into my territory, unarmed, without an army, just for a woman and 2 children." Vincent stopped in the middle of the warehouse, his eyes sweeping everywhere, memorizing the position of every gunman, every exit, every weak point in Blackwood's formation. He'd done this hundreds of times in his life, and tonight was no different. "Let them go," Vincent said, his calm almost unnatural. "What do you want from me? Territory? Money? Power? Say it, and I'll give it to you." Blackwood shook his head and stepped closer. "You still don't understand, Moretti? I don't want money. I don't want power. I want you dead." He paused, smiling with pure cruelty. "But before that, I want you to watch them die. I want you to taste what your brother tasted when I killed his fiancée." Natasha stepped out from behind, a gun in her hand, her eyes cold and full of hate. She moved to Scarlett and pressed the barrel to Scarlett's temple. "She took my place," Natasha said, her voice trembling with excitement. "She stole my fiancé. She stole my future. It's only fair if I take her life." Scarlett stared straight into Natasha's eyes, without a trace of fear. "I didn't steal anything from you. Vincent never belonged to you." Natasha lifted her hand, ready to slap Scarlett, but in that exact moment Vincent let out a short whistle. Everything happened in a heartbeat. The back door of the warehouse burst open, and Marco and Vincent's special team stormed in. They'd slipped in earlier, hidden in the dark, waiting for their boss's signal. Gunfire thundered, bullets ripping through the air, sparks flashing in the darkness. The fight exploded, brutal and close. Blackwood's men hit from behind without warning, their formation breaking apart. Vincent lunged toward Scarlett like an arrow, dodging gunfire on pure warrior instinct. He pulled a knife hidden in his sleeve and cut through the ropes in seconds. "Are you hurt?" he asked, eyes scanning her. Scarlett didn't answer. She only screamed, her voice raw with desperation. "The children! Save the children!" Vincent turned and saw Marco charging toward the iron cage where Leo and Luna were crying. He shot 2 guards, smashed the lock, and lifted both babies into his arms. "Get them out!" Vincent shouted. "Right now!" Marco nodded, holding the babies tight to his chest, and ran for the emergency exit. Around them, the fight kept raging. Blackwood's men were losing ground, but they still fought hard. Natasha disappeared in the chaos, seized by one of Vincent's men as she tried to flee. Blackwood stood in a corner of the warehouse, watching his empire collapse. His eyes were wild, filled with desperation and hate. He knew he'd lost, but he wouldn't lose without dragging someone down into hell with him. He drew a handgun, aimed straight at Scarlett, who was standing beside Vincent, and pulled the trigger. Vincent saw it. In that instant, time seemed to slow. He saw Blackwood's finger squeeze, saw the barrel lined up with Scarlett, saw the bullet about to fly, and he didn't think. He only moved. He threw himself between Scarlett and the bullet, using his own body as a shield for the woman he loved. The round tore through his chest with a wet sound. Vincent felt as if someone had driven a brutal fist into his body, and then the pain crashed over him like a tidal wave. He staggered, looked down at his chest, and saw blood soaking through his white shirt, spreading like a dark red flower. In the distance, Marco dropped Blackwood with a single shot to the head. The sworn enemy of the Moretti family fell, eyes still wide open, staring up at the ceiling. Vincent collapsed onto the freezing concrete, blood pouring from the wound in his chest, forming a red pool beneath his back. He heard Scarlett scream, but the sound seemed to come from far away. "Vincent! No! Look at me! Open your eyes!" Scarlett dropped to her knees beside him, both hands pressing hard against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Her tears fell onto his face, warm and salty. "Don't do this to me! Don't leave me, Vincent! I haven't Azad with Mediteria." The wail of an ambulance siren ripped through the Chicago night as the vehicle tore forward at maximum speed. Inside, Vincent lay on the gurney, an oxygen mask covering half his ashen face, blood still seeping through the pressure bandage. The medics were fighting to keep tight. Scarlett sat beside him, both hands locked around his ice-cold hand, refusing to let go even after the paramedics told her again and again to move back. "You can't die, Vincent. Do you hear me?" she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "You owe your children a whole lifetime. You owe Leo and Luna every moment you missed. You can't die before you pay that debt." Vincent didn't respond. His eyes were squeezed shut, his breathing thin, his skin losing color by the second. Scarlett watched the heart monitor, each beep a promise that he was still fighting. "You promised you wouldn't leave again," she whispered, tears running down her cheeks. "Don't break that promise. Don't leave me again." The ambulance stopped at the hospital entrance, and Vincent was rushed into the emergency department within seconds. Scarlett tried to run after him, but she was stopped at the doors to the operating room. "You can't go in. Please wait here," a nurse said, gentle but firm. The doors closed in Scarlett's face, and she stood there staring at the red light above the entrance turning on, signaling surgery was underway. Marco arrived a few minutes later with Leo and Luna in his arms. The babies were asleep from sheer exhaustion after all the crying, unaware their father was fighting for his life on the other side of that door. Scarlett took the children, held them close, and sat down on the cold plastic chair in the hospital hallway. 6 hours. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Scarlett sat there without eating, without drinking, without closing her eyes for even a second. She held Leo and Luna, stared at the operating room doors, and for the first time in years, she prayed. She didn't know who she was praying to. She'd stopped believing in God when she was a child abandoned in an orphanage. But tonight, she was willing to believe in anything, anyone, as long as Vincent survived. "Please let him live," she whispered into the darkness, her voice breaking. "I've lost too much already. Please don't take this one too." When the red light finally went out and the operating room doors opened, Scarlett shot to her feet, her heart slamming wildly in her chest. The surgeon stepped out, his face tired and grave. He pulled off his mask and looked at Scarlett with an expression she couldn't read. "Miss Morgan?" he asked, and Scarlett nodded, unable to speak. The doctor drew a deep breath. "We did everything we could." Scarlett crumpled. Her knees gave out, her body suddenly too weak to stand. Tears flooded out, and a strangled sob tore from her throat. "He's gone. Vincent is gone." She was too late. She never got to tell him she forgave him. She never got to tell him she still loved him. "And he made it," the doctor continued, his voice softer now. Scarlett lifted her head, not trusting her own ears. The bullet missed his heart by 2 centimeters. "He was very lucky. We removed the bullet and managed to stop the bleeding. He's still in a coma, but his vital signs are stabilizing." Scarlett broke down crying, but this time they were tears of relief. She hugged Leo and Luna tight, sobbing like a child, not caring who was watching. "He's alive. Vincent is alive." An hour later, Scarlett was allowed into the ICU. She stepped into the stark white room where Vincent lay motionless in the bed, surrounded by a forest of monitors. His face was pale as paper, but the screen beside him still showed a steady heartbeat. He was alive. He was breathing. Scarlett pulled a chair to the bedside, sat down, and took his hand. The hand was still cold, but she could feel a faint pulse under the skin. "Idiot," she whispered, her voice thick. "You're an idiot. Don't you ever do that again. Do you hear me? Don't you ever throw your body in front of a bullet for anyone again." She leaned down and placed a soft kiss on his forehead. "You have to live. For Leo, for Luna, for me." Silence. Then the fingers in her hand twitched. Scarlett lifted her head, and she saw Vincent's eyes slowly open. He looked at her, eyes dull from pain medication, but he still recognized her. "You're an idiot," he whispered, his voice rough and weak. "But I'm your idiot." The weeks that followed were the longest days of Vincent's life, but they were also the happiest. He was moved from the hospital back to the estate to continue recovering, and Scarlett became his primary caregiver. She changed his bandages every day, made sure he took his medicine on time, and wouldn't let him do anything that could affect the wound as it healed. Vincent, the man who once gave orders to hundreds of people, now obeyed everything she said without a single protest. Leo and Luna were brought to see their father every day. At first, they were frightened by the sight of him in bed, with tubes and machines around him. But little by little they grew used to climbing up onto the mattress beside him, listening to him tell stories in a weak voice. One afternoon, as Scarlett carried Leo closer to the bed, the baby suddenly looked at Vincent, opened his mouth, and said a single word clearly, "Da-da." The room went silent. Scarlett froze, eyes wide. Vincent stared at his son, not trusting what he'd heard. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice trembling. Leo looked at his father, grinned, and repeated it. "Da-da," Vincent cried, not the quiet tears he usually hid, but tears that ran freely down his cheeks, unrestrained, unhidden. He reached out, and Scarlett placed Leo in his arms. The baby grabbed his father's finger and kept babbling "da, da," as if it were the best word in the world. Luna refused to be outdone by her brother. She crawled across the bed to her father, pressed her tiny hands to his cheeks, and planted a loud kiss on his face. Vincent laughed, the brightest smile Scarlett had ever seen, even though the wound in his chest still hurt. It was the moment she realized this was her family. This was where she belonged. Late at night, when the babies were asleep, Vincent and Scarlett sat together in the dim light, talking about things they'd never told anyone. Vincent spoke about his childhood in a Mafia family, about a father so strict he was cruel, about a mother he lost to illness when he was 10, about the weight of being molded into an heir from the age of 15. "My father never hugged me," he said, his voice low and distant. He said, "Affection is weakness, and a Mafia boss isn't allowed to have weakness." I grew up believing that. I believed loving someone was like putting a knife in an enemy's hand. Scarlett listened, and for the first time she understood why Vincent had left her 14 months ago. Not because he didn't love her, but because he loved her too much and he was afraid of it. Then she told him about her dreams, the dreams she'd buried for a long time. "I only want a family," she said, her voice light as breath. "A small home, someone who truly loves me, healthy children. I don't need wealth, I don't need power, I just need to be loved." She paused and looked down at her hands. "But I never thought I deserved love. My childhood taught me I had no value, that I was an abandoned child, unwanted, not needed by anyone." Vincent took her hand and held it tight. "You're worth more than everything I own," he said, steady and sincere. "More than this entire empire, more than my life. You and the children are all I have." Scarlett looked at him, the man who'd thrown his body in front of a bullet for her, the man who'd been ready to die so she could live. She looked at the bandage on his chest, where the bullet had nearly taken his life, and she understood he'd proven his love in the strongest way he could. "You've proven enough," she whispered. Vincent looked at her, hope filling his eyes, but he didn't dare believe it. "Scarlett." She leaned toward him, and for the first time in 14 months, their lips met. It wasn't a fierce kiss like the ones they'd shared before. It was gentle, trembling, wet with tears. It was a kiss of forgiveness, of healing, of a new beginning. When they pulled apart, Scarlett looked into Vincent's eyes and said, "We start again, from the beginning, slowly. I won't promise it'll be easy, and I won't promise it won't hurt anymore, but I'm willing to try." Vincent lifted her hand and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. "I'll wait," he said, his voice full of certainty. "My whole life if I have to. I'll never leave again." 6 months passed like a dream. Vincent and Scarlett's little family moved to a house in the suburbs of Chicago, peaceful and safe. Far from the shadow-soaked Mafia world Vincent had lived in his whole life. The home wasn't as grand as the old mansion on the hill, but it had a wide yard where the babies could play, a white fence wrapped around it, and birdsong every morning. It was the place Scarlett had dreamed of during lonely nights in that miserable studio apartment, and now that dream had become real. Vincent kept his promise. He shifted most of his operations into legitimate business, from real estate to clean energy, industries he could leave to his children without shame. He still kept a few ties in the underworld, because that was unavoidable for a man with the name Moretti. But he no longer took part directly in the dirty work. Marco became the one who ran what remained, as a way to repay for what he'd done to Scarlett years ago. Scarlett went back to work too, but not because she needed money. She returned to Cook County Hospital as a nurse, working day shifts so she could be home with the babies every night. She loved her job, loved the feeling of helping people, and she didn't want to give it up just because her life was comfortable now. "I don't want to become someone who depends on you," she told Vincent when he asked why she still wanted to work. "I want our children to see that their mother has her own worth, not just that she's Vincent Moretti's woman." Vincent didn't argue. He understood and respected it. But the biggest change in Scarlett's life was that she started therapy. For the first time in her life, she faced the childhood wounds she'd buried for so many years. She spoke about the orphanage years, about her adoptive father, about the nights she wandered the streets of Chicago when she was 14. She spoke about the fear of being abandoned, about the feeling that she didn't deserve to be loved, about the walls she'd built around her heart so no one could ever hurt her again. Twice a week, Vincent drove her to the therapist's office. He didn't go inside with her, because this was a battle she had to fight on her own. But he always waited outside, sitting in the car until she came back out. Sometimes she stepped out with eyes red from crying, and he simply held her in silence. No questions, no pushing, just being there. On nights when nightmares came, he woke up instantly, pulled her into his arms, and held on until dawn. He didn't try to chase the nightmares away, because he knew they were part of healing. He only stayed there, a steady shore for her to cling to when the storm in her mind came roaring through. And little by little, Scarlett grew stronger, not because of Vincent, but because she chose to heal for herself. Leo and Luna were 10 months old now, growing fast and getting more mischievous every day. Leo could say more words than da-da now, babbling mama whenever he wanted Scarlett to pick him up, and no when he didn't like something. Luna still didn't speak much, but she was the first to walk. One afternoon, while the whole family was sitting in the living room, Luna suddenly let go of the sofa and wobbled toward Vincent. 1 step, 2 steps, 3, and then she toppled into her father's arms, giggling as if she'd just pulled off a great victory. Vincent hugged his daughter and spun her through the air, the laughter of father and daughter filling the room. Every weekend, the family went to the park near their home. It was a new habit they built, something so ordinary it was almost trivial for other families, but for Vincent and Scarlett, it was something they once thought they could never have. That afternoon, Vincent was pushing Leo and Luna on the swings, the babies squealing with laughter every time the swings flew high. Scarlett sat on the grass nearby, phone in hand, filming every moment. She watched Vincent, a man who had once been the most feared Mafia boss in Chicago, now pushing his children on swings with a bright smile on his face. No one in the park knew who he was. To them, he was just an ordinary father playing with his kids, and that was exactly what Vincent wanted. When the babies grew tired and wanted to rest, Vincent set them into the stroller and sat down beside Scarlett on the grass. He looked out toward the distance where the sun was slowly setting, painting the sky orange and pink. "I used to think power was everything," he said, his voice gentle and far away. "I used to think owning Chicago, owning the Moretti Empire, was the peak of life. I was wrong." He turned to look at Scarlett, then at Leo and Luna sleeping peacefully in the stroller. "This is everything." West Coast Day. A year had passed since the terrible night at Dock Warehouse No. 7, and the life of the Moretti family had changed completely. Leo and Luna were a year and a half old now. The tiny babies they'd once been had learned to run across the yard, learned to say dozens of words, and learned how to make their parents laugh every single day. "Daddy, up, up." Leo ran toward Vincent on short, chubby legs, throwing both arms up to be picked up. Vincent laughed, lifted his son high, spun him through the air, and the boys' laughter rang across the garden. "More! More!" Luna refused to be outdone. She ran to her mother and held out a wildflower she'd just picked. "Mommy, flower." Scarlett took the flower and kissed her daughter's cheek. "Thank you, my little princess." That afternoon, when the babies were tired and sat playing on the grass, Vincent and Scarlett sat side by side on the porch, watching their children under the late afternoon sun. It was the moment Vincent loved most each day, a peace so gentle he still had to pinch himself to be sure it was real. "Scarlett," Vincent said, his voice trembling a little. Something that almost never happened to a man who had faced death without blinking. Scarlett turned to him and saw a small velvet box in his hand. Her heart skittered. "Vincent, you're—" He opened the box, and inside was a ring. Not a huge, glittering diamond like the one he'd once given Natasha. This ring was simple, elegant, with a small stone at the center and words engraved inside the band. Scarlett lifted the ring and read the engraving. Leo, Luna, Scarlett. 3 names, 3 hearts. Everything that mattered most to Vincent. "You gave me a family when I didn't deserve one," Vincent said, his voice low and full of feeling. "You gave birth to my children. You raised them alone. And you still named our son after me, even after I abandoned you. You forgave me when I didn't deserve forgiveness. You gave me the chance to be a father, to be the man who loves you, to be a better man." He took her hand and looked straight into her eyes. "Now I want to be with you forever. Not for an alliance, not out of duty, not for any reason except one. I love you, Scarlett. I love you more than my own life. Will you marry me?" Scarlett looked at him, tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Vincent, I will." Vincent slid the ring onto her finger, then kissed her, a kiss full of love and promise. When they pulled apart, Scarlett held his hand and did something that startled him. She placed his hand on her belly. Vincent looked at her, confused. "Scarlett?" She smiled, her eyes shining. "You won't miss this one." Vincent's heart seemed to stop for a beat. He looked down at his hand on her stomach, then back up into her eyes, and the truth crashed over him like a wave. She was pregnant. Scarlett was pregnant with their 3rd child. He couldn't speak, his throat tight with emotion. Scarlett nodded, happy tears still falling. 8 weeks. "I wanted to wait until today to tell you," Vincent cried. The second time in his life, He cried in front of someone else without feeling shame. He pulled Scarlett into his arms, kissed her forehead, kissed her cheek, then dropped to his knees and kissed her belly. "This time, I'll be with you from the first day," he whispered to the baby who hadn't been born yet. "I won't miss another moment." A week later, the whole family went to the park. Their usual weekend habit. Leo chased a butterfly, bright laughter spilling across the grass. Luna sat picking flowers, carefully choosing the prettiest ones to give her mother. Vincent stood behind Scarlett, his arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. They both watched their children play, saying nothing, simply letting this peaceful moment fill them. No one in the park knew that the man holding his wife had once been the most feared mafia boss in Chicago. No one knew how much suffering they'd lived through, how much separation, how much blood and tears it had taken to reach this ordinary moment. To the outside world, they were just a normal family, enjoying a weekend afternoon, and that was exactly what they wanted. The most dangerous man in Chicago had discovered that real power didn't live in the bullets he fired or the empires he built. Real power lived in 3 hearts, soon to be 4, that had forgiven him and given him a reason to become better. Some stories end with dramatic battles, but the most beautiful love stories end with ordinary days, and the promise of countless ordinary days still to come. If this story moved you, drop a comment telling us, would you have given Vincent a second chance? Share this with someone who believes that even the most broken people can find redemption. And subscribe to our channel because some secrets are worth waiting for. See you in the next story.